and welcome to this episode of No Free Lunch. Professors Guernsey and Heyman here. No doubt you may remember from your own life the Great Recession that we just went through. None of us, including the two of us, are old enough to remember the Great Recession.
The Great Depression.
Great Depression, excuse me. How do economists talk about the Great Recession?
Well, the Great Depression is really still thought of as the holy grail of economics to explain it. And there are lots of different theories about it, but there's a lot of facts that we all kind of agree to. So I think it's useful to kind of get at some of them. I will tell you, we came up upon the whole theory of macroeconomics in large part because of the Great Depression. And as I tell people when I teach this in class, and I've got some references to it in the book, John Maynard Keynes' book came out. He got his general ideas in late 1932, carried over. He really rediscovered some of Thomas Malthus' work, and that led him in a fury to begin the work on the general theory. But the general theory came out in 1936. But Great Britain actually entered into its Great Depression, if you will, in 1926. For a decade, they'd had very, very high unemployment numbers, such that if markets cleared, if markets worked, why had they not already worked? We'd already had 10 years. And John Maynard Keynes actually thought that when he came out with his new theory, he was doing this to save capitalism. Remember, it had only been in 1936 less than 20 years since the Bolshevik Revolution. And there was continuing cries for socialism was in the vanguard, and communist movements were in many of the European countries. And if we kept these high levels of unemployment forever, we're going to have our own revolution in Great Britain. That's kind of his mentality. And there's some justification for that thought process after all. And so he said that he had a theory he believed would lead to a new way of thinking about economics. And so he was really focusing on the Depression, and you could almost forgive him for his quip that is now disparaged. When asked about the long-run effects of his policies, he said, in the long run, we're all dead. and which isn't much for wisdom, but after all, it's been 10 years, so you can kind of forgive him. So he's focused on the Depression from insufficient demand. And in his mind, he didn't acknowledge monetary policy as being a causal force at all. It was insufficient demand. It was only with Milton Friedman's work in 1963, his and Anna Schwartz's, which really revolutionized the way economics profession thought about it. In fact, that's completely turned on its head. Now monetary forces are thought to be, if not the only reason, that at least a strong driver, such that the former Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke in mid-2000s at a public speech was honoring Milton Friedman and says, "Mr. Friedman, you're right, we did it. I promise never to do it again." In the sense that the Federal Reserve, pretty much everybody would acknowledge, had at least a large role in the Great Depression. So let me hit just a couple of things to think about. Again, all of these will be debated. There's a lot of economists that would disagree with me on the implication. I doubt they would disagree with the factual basis of that, though. So monetary forces in multiple parts played into this. I would assert that the Great Britain going back on the pound at the pre-war parity was the start of the monetary mischief that happened. So Winston Churchill said all along that he intended to, during the World War I effort, don't worry on loaning us the money, we'll make the pound as good as gold again after the war. Well, they had a massive inflation driving prices up during World War I. To make the pound sterling what it was at the pre-war parity means you have to have a massive deflation. And their labor markets were much more unionized than America's even then, and it was very difficult to make that adjustment to lower wages and prices. But yet he did it. In fact, interestingly enough, both John Maynard Keynes, who was more in favor of state action, and Ludwig von Mises, the free market advocate, says, don't do this. Ludwig von Mises, in his famous way with words, said, this is akin to after driving somebody over with a car, trying to help them by putting the car in reverse and backing over them again. You don't do this, just stop. And likewise, in the Economic Consequences of the Peace, John Maynard Keynes warned against doing this, but yet Churchill did against all their best advice. What that meant was that the British goods, when they were not able to make the price adjustments and the wage adjustments, made their goods very expensive relative to others, and then their ability to export was curtailed, and they imported a lot. So we got the gift of the Roaring '20s that you've heard about, as British gold came to America and bought cheap, relatively, U.S. goods. And so that's why you saw Britain go into its Great Depression much earlier. Well, that monetary distortion in the United States caused the Roaring '20s, caused our own bubble economy, and this stimulus led to problems, which ultimately led to the high stock market valuation. Another relatively unknown monetary fact was France undervalued significantly their currency, which caused a lot of massive gold flow from England to France and the rest of the world. Even towards the end of the 1920s, massive amounts of gold from America to France. The gold standard should have kept those flows even, but by artificially overvaluing in the case of Great Britain, artificially undervaluing in the case of France, led to much monetary instability. And that led ultimately to asset prices that were out of whack. We had our stock market burst and so forth. That kind of gets us to the crash, if you will. But now we have other things going on that are involved in there. In America especially, we passed Smoot-Hawley trade restrictions, which is why we've covered trade previously. That led to a shrinkage of overall international trade that shrunk the global economy. Then we had, in 1932, Hoover passed a massive tax increase. Taxes on the rich went up from their high rate prior to that point was like 25%, and the highest rate went up to 63%. From 25 to 63% is a massive tax hike. Pretty much no economist today would say, you know, in the middle of the Great Depression, it's a pretty smart idea to raise taxes. That's unconventional wisdom. Even the lowest income people, they saw their income tax rates go from 1% to 4%. Again, so that's a 400% increase. Even though it's so low, it's still a big tax increase. That throttled the economy as well. So that was going on. Hoover himself had massive regulatory engagement to the businesses at the time. He called a conference in late October, early November of 1929. Says you will not fix this problem on the backs of workers. You're not allowed to basically cut wages. Well, if you can't cut wages in the face of diminished demand, the only thing you can do is cut quantity, and that's what led to the high layoffs. And then the final thing, I should get back to monetary. Our own Federal Reserve stood idly by, even though statutorily they were the lender of last resort. They allowed bank after bank to fail, who were simply illiquid banks, not insolvent, and that contributed to the banking crisis. And as these banks failed, we found that fractional reserve banking could go in reverse. Just like you could get money multiplication, you got money division going on, and we saw a massive reduction in the money stock. This gets back to Milton Friedman's work. And so there was a massive deflation in America from 1930 to 1933, over 10% a year, and that contributed to the severity. There are many other things, but those are just some of the facts of mistakes. We would today say we shouldn't raise taxes. We should not restrict global free trade. We should have the monetary policy be stable. We shouldn't start from a position where currency valuations are dramatically misvalued across the trading world. All those things were kind of government mistakes we had made that people would say, we probably shouldn't do that today.
Well, hopefully we've learned our lesson, and as Ben Bernanke says, we won't do that again.
We won't do that again. We'll do something different.
Yeah, we'll do something different. That's right. Yeah. Thanks for joining us for this episode of No Free Lunch. We'll see you again.